Okay, I have the pleasure to introduce Mark Mitchell today. Um, I don't know, I got to know him a while ago, 5 years, yeah. Anyway, he is from the Mason Mountain WMA, and he has this story tale of a career as a biologist, I will have to say. He's been with Texas Park and Wildlife since 1986. He started at the coastal WMA, WMA outside of Lake Jackson, Texas, which then you learn about the coastal biology and ecosystem. Then he moved to Gonzales as a regulatory biologist, and then to Edna, Texas. I don't know what that is. Until 1999. So then when he worked in Southeast Texas, along with assisting landowners, he was involved in research projects on bald eagle. How cool is that? Piping plover and peregrine falcons, and then white-tailed deer and bobwhite quail. Waterfowls, ooh, a lot of birds. I'm a terrible birders. Anyway, and then he transferred to Mason Mountain in 1999 and assumed the area manager responsibility in 2002. Okay, so since then, he'd been involved in research associated with white-tailed deer, exotic. You guys know Mason Mountain is about exotic, right? Then collared peccary and horned lizard and black-tailed prairie dog reintroduction. Okay, so beside research on game and non-game species, he's also have been involved in the management of habitat through prescribed fire, which scared the bejesus out of me, but okay. So he had been a burn boss. Wow. And he conducted over 160 prescribed fire, totaling almost 20,000 acres. So he told me that he's always say there's two things wildlife biologists really enjoy, and that's trapping and moving animals and burning dead grasses and sticks. And so I think that is true for me, but I also like to do research on animals as well. So I have been lucky to have gotten to do both. So anyway, this is Mark Mitchell, and he's going to talk to us about prairie dog, the black-tailed. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. And you really made me feel old talking about all these places I've been now. I'm feeling it. But I want to be fully clear about my knowledge of prairie dogs. I am not a prairie dog expert. In fact, I grew up kind of in this eastern central part of the state. Never saw a prairie dog unless I went snow skiing and in Colorado and went through the Panhandle. Then, like Kim pointed out, I spent my first part of the career down on the coast, and I did a lot of research on a lot of non-game species, a lot of bird work between Mexico and Florida. And after getting eaten by mosquitoes for about 13, 15 years, me and my wife thought maybe we ought to move inland a little bit, see something different. So we moved to Mason. And in 1999, we moved there, and I bought a little piece of property to build a house on. And me and one of my old bosses from LaGrange, Texas, were riding around on our property one day, and because he wanted to see it, he was up there, and this little animal jumps in the road. And I'd been seeing these little ground squirrels on my neighbor's property set by these holes. And I said, well, that's the little Mexican ground squirrels. We didn't have those where I grew up. I didn't really know what they were. This animal jumps into the road, and I say, well, Bob, what is that? That looks like a little weasel. Well, that's one of them Mexican ground squirrels. He's a deer biologist, I mean, everything to him is either a squirrel or, something else. That's just one of them little Mexican ground squirrels. I didn't know what it was. Then I go to work at Parks at Mason Mountain. At the guys there was a volunteer that volunteered with Texas Parks and Wildlife for 30 something years. Monroe Bunning, and Monroe is a very, went to high school with Hal, so that might answer some of these questions. I'm going to talk about Monroe a little bit. But Monroe, when I got there, they had talked about wanting to reintroduce black-tailed prairie dogs on Mason Mountain. Monroe is specifically. The other biologists, the other people on the area said that's stupid because people's going to run us out of the county. And I thought, well, okay, well, what about javelina? And I got the same response, is that people are going to run us out of the county if we try to bring javelina back into Mason. So around 2004, I guess I started feeling that I knew what I was talking about. So we pushed to relocate javelina back into the area. We did that, and we had some opposition to it, not a whole lot, not what the old timers had kind of warned me about, but we did have some opposition to it. And but it took off, and we now even have some javelina hunts in Mason County. They're doing good in certain areas. So I felt pretty good about myself. I thought I knew what I was talking about. And then around 2015, how many of y'all work for the state or familiar with the state pay system? Okay. You know what the rule of 80 is. You know, when you hit that, it's like you're golden. You know, in 2015, I hit the rule of 80, which meant they could fire me, they could kick me out of there, but they can't take my pension. I was vested. I could get a check for the rest of my life. So around 2015, I said, you know, these people can get rid of me, but I got my pension. So let's reintroduce prairie dogs if it gets that bad. You know, they really can't hurt me. So we started, you know, well, that's where we started to try to reintroduce prairie dogs. And so by 2017, that's when we started on Mason Mountain. So with that said, you can tell I don't have a lot of experience with prairie dogs prior to 2017. So I'm not an expert, but I have got to work with the expert, and I'll have a picture of here or there. So I'm going to tell you what I know about prairie dogs, what I've learned a lot in the last 5 or 6 years about them, but I've not studied them my whole life. So don't think that I think I'm an expert. Hal and Amy has spent more time with the expert than I have, and they probably actually know way more than me. But we're going to get on with this, and maybe we'll see something. Okay, there's 5 species of prairie dogs in North America. This is the Black-tailed Prairie Dog range, and you can tell it goes all the way from Canada down into Texas, and actually went into Mexico a little bit. They didn't stop at the river. Uh-oh. This is what's called the Gonzales prairie dog. This is a Western species. It's almost like a subspecies. They think it broke off from the black-tailed prairie dog. You have two categories. You got the white-tail and the black-tail, and then the others are kind of descendants from those. The Gonzales is, as you can see, it occupies western Colorado, parts of Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico. And then you have the white-tailed prairie dog, which is the other version. You have the black-tail and the white-tail, and that's mainly in Wyoming, goes down to Utah. And then you've got the little population called the Utah prairie dogs in the southwestern corner of Utah. And then all the way down in Mexico, you got the Mexican species. Doesn't show up here much, but this was a break off from the black-tail species. And those last two, they occupied a very small range, so they had a very limited, probably DNA makeup, and those two are on the endangered species list. So they have declined so much that they are actually listed as an endangered species. The black-tailed prairie dog in Texas, this is their historic range. And if you look at that, you see it went all the way down into Bexar County. It covered here in Kerr County. And of course, Mason is the epicenter of the whole world. And so we're kind of the epicenter of the old prairie dog. Not really, but we were well within the range. In fact, we knew they existed there in the mid 90s, 1990s. We knew of some colonies not 6 or 8 miles from where we are. Today, this is the estimated range of prairie dogs in Texas. So as you can see, in Texas alone, it's lost a lot of country. It's lost like 95 to 98% of its range throughout its range, or its habitat throughout its range. And even though it shows a pretty big portion of Texas in its current range, keep in mind that they don't exist from county to county in that area. They could be a little block in that area, and then you may go 50 miles and never see one. Hal and I went to Lubbock, a year or so ago, Hal, to pick up some prairie dogs. And there's kind of like 2 ways you go to Lubbock. There's a western route and more of an eastern route. The western route, you don't see a prairie dog till you get in town. Coming the western route, I was coming back and I finally saw in the pasture a small prairie dog town. It couldn't have been more than 20 or 30 acres on thousands and thousands, 1,000-acre ranches. So even though they are considered occupying this, they're not widespread here. They've lost 95 to 98% of the range. And the numbers went from an estimated 4 billion or something like that, and who can estimate billions in the 1800s, to, in the millions today. So they are on the decline. And so what does that mean? Since they're on the decline, they're not endangered anything, but it could be headed that way. So we wanted to reintroduce them. And so we started by notifying our neighbors. So we had an open meeting for everybody in the state in Basin that could come and give comments. One person showed up, but after talking to us, they left pretty happy. One neighbor wrote a letter and it says, "This is very important. I don't want groundhogs and I don't like your javelina either." That was our next door neighbor. And I want you to remember this. I'm going to try to remember and come back to this, why this statement is important to a biologist. Okay. So in 2017, I don't know, any of y'all know Don Frails Jr. that used to run the Kerr Wildlife Man? I know Coy does. Don Frails, Donnie, as everybody called him, his father was a retired biologist at Parks and Wildlife. He was my boss at the time. And he was somewhat reluctant because a real biologist studies in the hill country anyway, studies white-tailed deer. He runs the white-tailed deer, Donnie Harmer white-tailed deer research pens at the Kerr area. And you want to be known as a deer biologist. But everything we were doing at that time, the white-tailed deer pens had the Donnie Harmel name on it. The pig research facility at the Kerr, it was assigned to somebody else, so Donnie couldn't take that. So we wanted something named after him, so I named my prairie dog town the Donnie Frails Rodent Research Site before he retired. Coy probably appreciates that, don't you? And he appreciated that. He didn't say it, but I know he appreciated it. Okay, so when we started this, we did like any good biologist. We go to the literature search and we see, what do you have to do to reestablish black-tailed prairie dogs? We didn't ask the experts. What we did was we went to the literature and asked the PhDs. So what they say is you need to dig a hole 4 to 6 foot deep, put this panel in there. This is a sewer panel that you use for septic with the hose that comes up, and then you put a cage at the top. You put the prairie dogs in the cage. They go down and in and out for about 10 days. Then they chew their way out. This is pretty labor intensive in the hill country to dig a hole 4 to 6 foot deep. We dug 10 of these. We spent thousands of dollars doing that until I met Linda Watson and found out, boy, that's a joke. It's really unnecessary. So we got with the Wildlife Services, who have spent most of their career killing prairie dogs, and they were tired of that and they wanted to try to reestablish them. So they said they're going to help us out. So they caught the first animals in March 2017. After hours and hours and hours of trapping, they brought us 37 animals. And then in January of 2018, they supplemented that with 29 animals. Now, in a minute, you're going to see just how fruitless that is. When you're talking about prairie dogs, 37 animals, you can lose that before sundown. These animals are here for a reason, and part of that reason is to feed other things. So this really didn't do anything except whet our appetite, to be honest with you. So this is Mason Mountain, and we had this great fear that we're going to put prairie dogs here, and within 2 to 5 years, they're going to be downtown Mason on the beautiful courthouse square with these holes and digging up the golf courses. And it's just going to be pandemonium, and they're going to run me out of the county. So what we did is we picked spots that were not the greatest for prairie dogs, but they were the greatest for our survival, we thought. And that is up next to the mountain. And I can't point this out, but if you look at the little Mason Mountain, is there a pointer up here? Let's see. Oh, great. Okay. This is our office. And as you go here, this is granite type country. This pink is huge granite outcroppings like enchanted rock. This is Mason Mountain. This is a limestone mountain. The only way prairie dogs can really expand is through digging holes and expand. They don't get on top of the ground and run a mile and then dig a hole, because as they're running that mile, something catches and kills them. So they had to dig holes. So we put them up here. We were really smart. We thought that, we know what prairie dogs like. We'll put them here. They can't go north because they can't dig through that rock. They can't come south, so they can't dig through this rock. But this is a little valley here that they can dig in. And it was right. It was a little valley, and it did seem to work. And then in 2020, we started another one. Same thing over here, not too far. Started in another town over here. With the idea they can't get to our neighbors because of that rock. That's very important. That's not that important. Okay, this is some of the problems, and these slides might be a little bit graphic, but this is the area. And the next slides is some of the problems our early releases met with. And a lot of these slides are the problems you meet with forever. Hal has gone through this, Hal and Amy. Like I say, they were here for a reason, and part of that reason is to feed other things. Rattlesnakes, Western Diamondbacks really like their holes. And when the hole is not totally built correctly or finished, this is what happens when a prairie dog gets bit, and that one dies. Red-tailed hawks, big part of what they're here for is to help feed the migrating raptors. And you can see this is one of our release cages that had just come out. Hawk got one. That one was lucky that day, wasn't it? Bobcats. Now, to be honest, it takes a smart bobcat to learn to hunt these things because they go to bed really early. You think about, bobcats are night hunters, nocturnals. They're hunting, and bobcats and coyotes are more nocturnal hunters. Well, these things are in bed 30 minutes before sundown. They go underground, they go out, and then they don't come out until Hal? An hour after sunrise? Yeah. So it takes a smart cat. And from my experience, every cat that learns to do that is a female. I don't know what relationship that is, but that's what we have found. Okay. This is a set of pictures. This shows how smart a female bobcat can be. And we noticed it's a female because we actually relocated her. But this took 22 pictures over 45 minutes. Did any of y'all see the bobcat? Look right there. This was the first picture, and you can't see the timestamp on y'all screen, but I can see it here. This was at 5:02 in the afternoon, so well before sundown. And March 13th, 5:02. There's the cat coming in. Now, I cut a lot of pictures out just because it takes so long, but you'll see the same result. Okay. This picture here was taken at 5:18, and look at the cat. And look at the prairie dogs. This is the interesting thing. There's one there. There's one there. They see that cat, but it's moving so slow they don't pay attention. Okay, look, here's the prairie dogs out. Here's the cat. That is 5:27. That's how patient that cat is coming in. Okay, this is at 5:35. The prairie dogs, the cat's right here. If you look right here, here's an armadillo that walked right in front of the cat about 3 pictures later. He never looked up. And then this is 5:48. So that cat learned to hunt in the afternoon when those things were out, and it learned by being patient that they would sit there and let it creep up on her. This cat was raising some kittens that spring and wiped the whole town out. It was over. She got every one until we relocated her. Okay, so if you look at this map, this is where the 2 colonies were. You can see this is the trees of Mason Mountain. It's a ridge about 200 and something feet high. This is granite rocks. You can see how small those areas are. And this is the original town we started that we thought had made it. It was doing really, really good. This is the core of the town. You can see some of the holes on the outside. And when we hit the drought of 2020, it rained a lot in 21, 22, I guess it started getting dry. And last year. And they ate all this out. There was nothing for them to eat. So that was forcing them to go to these edges. When that was forcing them to the edges, that was making them vulnerable to predations that could hide in those trees and get them close. They needed more room. So when this town probably had 75 or 100 prairie dogs in it at its peak, and within 6 months, there was a cat probably raising little ones by that. There were some birds that had hawks that had learned to sit in these trees. They wiped the whole town out. So we had nothing. So at that point, we decided we're going to start over down here. And a couple of things that happened. First of all, we had found out that you can't put 30 prairie dogs out there and repopulate the whole county within 3 to 5 years. We learned that they move really slow. The town expands at a very slow rate. So that didn't scare me a whole lot. The next thing that happened, remember that letter I told you about that neighbor that said, I don't want your groundhogs and I don't like your javelina too. Well, she was a little older than me. She passed away and this was her property and we bought it. So what does that mean? That means Mark can put prairie dogs in her front yard now if he wants to. Yes, exactly. So to date, I just want to show the amount of prairie dogs it takes. And I'm fixing to show you a picture of who helped us out here. And without her, we couldn't have come close to doing this. But on Mason Mountain, started in 2017, we had released 650 prairie dogs in 3 towns on Mason Mountain and had 5 prairie dogs that we know of. We think we had 5 until Friday. And Friday I released 49. So I added that this morning. Private ranch number 1. And I'm not, I can't really tell you what ranches these are because there's landowner confidentiality, but private ranch 1 really like prairie dogs, started 3 towns. I think their first town was in 2019 and they brought, I know about 210, but I think there was more. I'm not real sure about all the numbers. Private ranch number 2 was in another part of the county. They wanted to do it and they brought 53, and private ranch number 3 in 21 took 103. I'll get to that in a minute. But that's the kicker. That's the real surprising thing about them. On private ranch number 2, I don't think they have any left. I talked to them the other day. On this private ranch number 3, they still got some, not very many, but they were wanting some more. So they're still very interested. Yes, Coy. I'm fixing to get to there. Yes, ma'am. No. From 2007, that was our first release. And to date, we had released 650 until Friday. And Friday, I released 49 more. But by Friday, I only had 5 left out of those 650. Yes. That's what I mean. We had released 650 because I had given this talk a month or so ago. But to supplement it so we would keep the town going, I got 49 more. So we released around 700. Okay. Sorry about that. They were, and I'll get to that in just a second. Okay, this is a map of Texas, of Mason County, and if it is a surprise to anybody, we're the most colorful, prettiest piece of property in the whole county. That's why I colored this up like that. That's us. This is a private ranch that has stocked them, that has 3 towns. This is 2 ranches down here. These are actually 2 different ranches split by a fence that has stocked them. So one of the problems we're getting into is that we have landowners that want to do this, but what we really need is a bunch of landowners in one area so that they can feed off each other. So when a town has a problem, there's other ones to fill in, and hopefully we'll get there. Okay, suppliers of prairie dogs. This is where we go. This is the prairie dog expert of the United States, without a doubt. Not Micro, but Linda Watson. Miss Watson has trapped well over 200,000 prairie dogs and moved. 200,000. Think about that. The reason she's trapping them is because Lubbock is a growing town. Midland is a growing town. Amarillo, all those towns, just like everywhere in Texas, those towns are growing. You want to put a water burger in Lubbock, and so you buy a lot. It's got prairie dogs on it. It's got a prairie dog town on it that people would stop and look at. The last thing you want to do is have the paper come out and you're poisoning 500 prairie dogs to put your water burger. That doesn't look good. So they pay Miss Watson to come catch those. Those dogs are going to die, but they pay her to catch them so that they don't kill them. And it's not bad PR for them in the paper. And then when she catches them, she has to find a home for them. She has to do something with them, and she was taking them private ranches or whatnot. And that's where she met Hal and I, and that's where we helped as a place for her to go. So in 2017, the Department of Wildlife Services, with about 4 or 5 people at whatever it costs the government to pay for those 4 or 5 people, in 2 years caught 66 animals. Linda Watson, this is from the time I met her, 2018 till present. And this is just what I know about. So I may not know every prairie dog that's coming to Mason. She has brought in to Mason 950 plus animals, that all of those animals were going to die wherever they were from. She didn't go to healthy towns and rob healthy towns from ranches. She was taking them out of predominantly urban areas to where the people wanted to get rid of them. Now, how do you get rid of prairie dogs? They've been extirpated from 95 to 98% of their range. So how do you do that? You know, some people say you do it by shooting them, you know, and if you talk with Linda, she laughs at people who think they're going to control prairie dog towns through shooting them. She said, you just can't do it. You know, you can't shoot that many. Linda will catch 200 by lunch. You can't shoot 200 by lunch. So they poison them. So, you know, this is so much better for the prairie dogs. They want to get rid of them. They pay her to do it. She catches them. And then we try to reestablish them down here or in other places. So it's really great for the animals, and she could make a living. Linda has since had a medical issue and she's unable to catch them right now. So our program is kindly hampered a whole lot until we can find somebody to replace them. Yes, ma'am. Okay. The way Miss Watson catches them, she has a big truck filled with, she asked, how does she catch them? How does Linda catch these prairie dogs? And how is she so efficient? She's got a truck that carries 5,000 gallons of water on it. She adds soap, like dishwashing soap, to the water. She drives over the hole, opens the thing to fill the hole up with soapy water, and whatever's in the hole comes out. She's hoping it's prairie dogs. Sometimes it's rattlesnakes, and occasionally it might be the badger. But Linda gets down there and she's on her knees, and as they come out blinking their little eyes because they got soap in it and all that, she's grabbing them. And I've seen pictures of her with 3 or 4 in her arms holding them. And these are prairie dogs that could bite your fingers off, and she's grabbing them by bare hand and then washing them off and put them in a cage. And I think, doesn't she talks like she catches 100 to 200 by lunch someday. Just unbelievably efficient. Yeah. So that's pretty interesting. Okay. So what have I learned about prairie dog biology? And somebody had asked some of the reproduction questions. This is some of the things we're going to call. Yes, exactly. Call Linda. Linda could tell you. Prairie dogs don't reproduce as fast as most rodents. We think of most rodents as very productive. You get a mouse in your house, and pretty soon you're like an infestation. Prairie dogs breed one time a year, like February. The female is an estrus for 1 hour. 1 hour, 1 day a year. They'll have between 4 and 8 pups that stay underground with their eyes closed until, like, I think ours come out like May the 17th. When does y'all's come out? April, late April to early May. And they come out, and those 4 to 6, 7 little pups, if a hawk gets them, if a badger gets them, there's no more produced for that year. You know, she doesn't come into heat again. She doesn't have a second litter. She's not like some things that, you know, if they lose the first, they come back and have another one. So for a rodent, they're very slow reproducing. And what Linda says, and I'll get to this a little bit, but Linda says if one of those out of 5 or 6 pups makes it to adulthood, that's very lucky. So most of them aren't going to make it. They seem to have a high mortality rate. With us, it's close to 100% so far. You can see the numbers. But some of the literature I found shows that subadults are less than 2 years old. 44% of those are going to die every year. So 1-year-old prairie dogs, only about 56% are going to make it through that year, and as subadults. Then once they reach adults, which is 2 years old, 23% of them die. So almost, what is that? 1/3 of your prairie dogs are going to die every year. And because why are they here? What's their purpose? To feed things. Okay. If you're not dying, you're not feeding things. So it's a tough life for a prairie dog. Prairie dogs don't harbor plague. Now, this is a big one. When we started this, we have all heard the rumor about, oh, you bring prairie dogs, you're bringing plague into Mason, and we're going to kill all the kids and mama too. You know, with the sylvatic plague. Sylvatic plague is bad. Now, I'm not downplaying the plague, but the plague is in every county right now in Texas. The only reason it's not documented in Mason County is what the zoonosis people tell me, is because they've only tested 6 animals ever in the history of Mason for plague. And 4 of those came off us because we had prairie dogs, and I want to test to make sure that, you know, just to document they don't have it. The thing about prairie dogs that's unique is they live in coteries. A coterie is like a family group, so they live very tight and using the same holes. So it's like a city to where people are living in maybe not the best cleanly type things. You know, I mean, they're sharing fleas, they're sharing whatever they have, they share a lot. So a coyote that has been bitten by a flea that had plague, got a little sick, but got over it. Now he's a carrier. He's got the titer, is that what you call it? And he goes prancing through that prairie dog town. A flea jumps off that has the plague in it. It bites that prairie dog. Within 3 days, that prairie dog is dead. No ifs, ands, or buts. 99% of the prairie dogs that gets bit by a flea carrying sylvatic plague are going to die within 72 hours. But in that time, it's shedding more fleas that are biting all the other ones. So, you know, if you have a raccoon that walking down the road that gets plague, he dies, he's laying on the side of the road, you don't pay a lot of attention to it. You might say, okay, maybe it was distemper, maybe something killing, maybe it's old age, who knows? But if you go to a prairie dog town and there's 5,000 dead prairie dogs, you think, oh my God, we've got a plague. And sure enough, you may have the plague. It wipes the whole town out, and it's noticeable because there's so many there. So we associate plague with prairie dogs when in fact they should be like the canary in the cave, that when you see that, you know you've had plague, and it's a warning to you. Not that it's that dangerous to you, but I wouldn't walk through a town like that. So they don't carry plague, and they don't carry a lot of other diseases. They're just very susceptible to it. But they've got a bad rap about that. They're extremely successful, and they're also very susceptible, whatever, to distemper. How many of y'all know what distemper is? Distemper is a common zoonotic disease that occurs through here. Ever so often, you get very high raccoon populations in the hill country, and then next year you notice you don't have the coon populations. Distemper can wipe through them. They can wipe through. I know at the Texas Tech Research Facility at Junction, they feel like that the rock squirrels, those black rock squirrels and the Mexican grass squirrels, that wiped them out. Distemper came through there and wiped those out. And it'll do the same thing to prairie dogs because they don't have a lot of resistance to it. So, you know, they're kind of a show thing for when diseases hit you that you know they got. So what we have learned about restocking, and I put this is important. This is Linda Watson. And this is what Linda and Hal both do best. Linda talks and Hal listens. Am I wrong, Hal? and I guarantee you, yes, ma'am. That's right. And Linda is telling Hal something important there. I promise you that. I'm not real sure, but I don't want to speak for Hal and Amy, but for me, I have learned everything I know about prairie dogs pretty much from Linda Watkins. She is the expert, and fascinating, very fascinating woman. But some of the things I've learned, maintaining a prairie dog town is really tough. The little fellas are very fragile. And, you know, I hear people from the panhandle, they say, you know, man, if you lived up here, they're not, you know, they're hard to control. They're hard to contain. But you drive through Lubbock and here's a vacant lot that's got 100 on them. There's a paved street and a beautiful golf course across the road. They can contain them. They control them. They've wiped them out over 95 to 98% of their range. They've knocked their numbers back like that. So they can't be that fragile. I mean, they can't be that tough. They're very easy to control nowadays. They need as big an opening as you can. I don't know why this would surprise me, because every time you see a prairie dog, it's on the plains of the panhandle to where you can't see a tree within 10 miles. But I think I'm going to put them on 10 acres and do okay. That's just my arrogance. A lot more people like them than I would have thought. When we started this, I really thought I was going to get run out of Mason. I was told by Monroe in 1999, you'll never be a Masonite. My daughter was 5 at the time. He said, she might be, but you will never be a Masonite. In 2015, I accepted the fact. So I thought, okay, I'll never be a Masonite. They can't take my pension. They can run me out, but I'm going to bring them in. To my surprise, we've had a number of landowners in Mason that want to put them on their property. And I had a landowner that has talked to me back in the winter, and I ran into him last week. He said, when can I get some prairie dogs? His family has owned land in Mason for a long time. And I hated to tell him, but we can't get prairie dogs. Al is a great example. Y'all's family is they're not a new Mason landowner. They didn't make $1 million in Houston, come buy a property, and now they want to make it. Longtime landowner, they put them on their place. They really like it. So it's surprising. There's a changing attitude amongst landowners, old landowners and new landowners, that are more accepting and more understanding the value of stuff like this. It takes a lot of dogs to build a town. Like I said, we put almost 700 on Mason now, and hopefully we've got 50. So that's an interesting thing. And this is what Linda told me from the get-go. One of the first conversations we had is, when you're putting these animals out there, and she loves prairie dogs. Don't get me wrong. She loves prairie dogs. It's her life. It's what she's committed her life to. She says, most of these prairie dogs, Mark, are going to die. She'll give me 60, let's say. Most of these are going to die. Don't cry over these dying, because they're going to build infrastructure. And what you're wanting to do is build that infrastructure, let them build the infrastructure, the holes and all the tunnels and all that stuff, everything it takes to keep them alive. Once you get the infrastructure built, the dogs will make it. And since she can catch so many, then she says, don't be concerned about that. And don't be concerned if a rancher wants to put them on his property and he just flat tells you, I want to put them on my property because I have paid deer hunters and they'll pay me to go hunt prairie dogs. And they may shoot some prairie dogs. You know how some people like to do that. She said, that's not a bad thing. If he allows 10% of his prairie dogs to get killed every year, but he maintains a 50-acre prairie dog town, isn't that better than not having a prairie dog town? For all the wildlife that use that, isn't that a better thing? So if and I hate to say this, but I talk to a lot of conservationists nowadays. If you don't have value in this world, if you're an animal that does not have value in this world, you're not long for this world. You've got to have some value to people or they get rid of you. And right now, the panhandle, a lot of those people don't see a value in these. And that's why it's important that we talk about this and we talk to people and we realize that they have value. May not be what you think. The most valuable lesson I've learned about prairie dog reintroduction, and I should have learned this as a young kid, but it took me a lot of years, is patience. Remember that lady that did not like my javelina? I waited her out. and so now that's a neat piece of property. And that's something else that I'll likely at some point come talk to y'all about, this new piece of property, which is I'm pretty excited about. Now, let me think. I think I got one more slide. Why is this project important? I kind of made a career, you might say, about doing things, doing projects that I thought was very interesting, very fun, that the average hunter, the average sportsman think, what's the purpose of that? I think it's pretty evident when we were studying bald eagles that everybody liked bald eagles. And so that was a pretty easy one to sell years ago, and I really enjoyed that. I've caught more bald eagles than anybody in the state of Texas. I think I've caught around 80 myself. I mapped piping plover habitat up and down the coast, from Louisiana to Mexico. That to most people was not important. But the most useless thing most people think I've ever done is try to reintroduce black-tailed prairie dogs, because so many people are trying to get rid of them. I think some people see the value, but they're a keystone species, and they have been documented to impact up to 150 other species. So think about that. In that range, there's 150 species that are using prairie dog habitat to some extent. Now, when I was working with colonial waterbirds, this was put to me in a pretty interesting way. And I think about the prairie dogs. You've got a lot of coastal islands that birds may use for 3 or 4 weeks of their life. That's it. They're a migrant bird. They come in, they hit that little barrier island, or they hit that spoil island, and they rejuvenate themselves. They've taken a long flight, and they're only there for 3 weeks. Then they leave and go to Canada, wherever. Is that island important? They're only using it for 3 weeks. Yes, it's very, very, very important, because if they don't have it, they're going to die. So this is the same way with these mountain plovers. Their migration route goes from prairie dog town to prairie dog town. They feed in the prairie dog towns. So I don't know how far a mountain plover flies a day, but let's say he flies 1,000 miles. He flies 1,000 miles expecting this prairie dog town that he gains his food from, to rejuvenate himself so that he could continue his migration. He shows up, and the ranchers killed all the prairie dog towns. Now he can't feed himself because the town is no longer there. So they're very important for 150 species. So if prairie dogs have lost 95% of their home range, that means animals that utilize those towns have lost 95% of their range. Think about that. How many of y'all familiar with lesser prairie chickens? Is fixing to be listed correctly. Was that correct? Prairie chickens lived in the prairie that was dominated by black-tailed prairie dogs. And if you talk to prairie chicken people sometimes, and I used to work with outriders prairie chickens a lot when I was down on the coast, and lesser to some extent, or probably the same. But you see them in the tall grass. You see them, you think this is what they need. They need the grass. But for those couple of weeks, they do their mating dance. They call them lecking areas. So they have to go to a bare area, and they strut around like they're really something, trying to attract the females. That's probably was prairie dog towns. That's where they need. And if they don't have that, it's going to impact them somehow, or they didn't coexist with them. So, I think it's just kind of arrogant to say that we can maintain lesser prairie chickens without prairie dogs, because God put them both here together, and they coexisted with each other. So that's an important one. How many of y'all ever heard of an earless lizard? There's a spotted earless lizard that only lives in the prairie dog towns. How about the Texas kangaroo rat that likes to, they call it degraded, over-abused habitat? Is there anything more degraded and over-abused than some prairie dog towns? Probably not. It's on the listed species list. So all these things are suffering, and I think a lot of it has to do with the prairie dogs. It can be not a popular idea if you live in Amarillo, Texas, to say, hey, if we want to save all these other things, we have to reintroduce and save the black-tailed prairie dogs. It takes somebody with that rule of 80. I'll tell you that right now. Burrowing owls, a great one. Hal has to bring this up. One of the things that I was so excited about when we started our prairie dog town is I wanted to see it's like a bucket list. I want to see a burrowing owl on my prairie dog town that I can say I helped. Hal's got pictures of them, got some now roosting on his. So that's a neat thing. Now, the biggest wildfire, I always say, starts with a spark. And even though there's only a handful of landowners in Mason, and we're not the epicenter of the prairie dog world, even though we're the epicenter of most things, it starts with a spark. And I feel like that spark is growing. And I feel we've got a young guy that works for us west of Lubbock. When I started this project in 2015, the panhandle biologists really kindly were like, that's stupid. Why are you doing that? And just laughing at me. And they came down and actually said, giving a tour one day, well, these things are so hard to get rid of. If you were up here, you would find out why you don't want them. Now, once we've done this young biologist at Yoakum Dunes Wildlife Management Area west of Lubbock has reintroduced them. And he has turned around a lot of our people's attitudes up there to where he caught prairie dogs tomorrow or today to reintroduce on a private ranch in that country. So things are starting to turn around there. It's slow, it's starting to turn around. So yeah, I feel good that, if nothing else, maybe I started a little spark that's going to change. Okay, I'm going to take questions, but before I do, I've got one other thing. When I had my daughter in 1992, my mother would tell me, don't be that obnoxious parent that carries all those pictures showing everybody. Nobody thinks you've got the cutest kid in the world, and nobody else likes your dog. That's what she would tell me, so you don't annoy people. But it doesn't apply to grandparents. So I'm going to show you the cutest little granddaughter you've ever seen. So my hypocrisy has no bounds, I would like to tell my mother. So anyway, is there any questions? Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Okay. I'm yes, sir. Absolutely. And if we get this supply issue worked out to where, once again, I have an abundance of them, please call me. Yeah, and we could do something. It's a lot easier. I made it look hard. Like I said, we read the wrong papers on reintroducing prairie dogs. The PhD said you had to dig this hole, you had to buy this stuff put down, you had to do all this work. Linda says, and this is what we do now. Linda says you take your auger, you dig a hole, you put your release cage on it, and you put those things in that little hole. It's very easy. I mean, it takes us it takes about an hour to set up 10 spots. As long as you got a skid steer and auger. So it's not near as hard as we thought. The whole issue is the supply. And I think we'll get that worked out. I hope we do. Yes, sir. Oh, yes. And this is Amy. Hal and Amy, they have some prairie dogs, and I'm not, Amy, am I okay to talk about your property? Okay. It's pretty obvious. But they're the property that has 3 towns on it that are doing really, really good. And Amy and Hal became really good friends with Miss Watson, and Miss Watson encouraged them to hand raise these puppies. And so these were born this year. She's hand raised them so that they can take them to school groups or groups like this to be an advocate for prairie dogs. That's named after Linda. Yeah.
Oh, these guys are Texas. They are Hill Country member. Okay,
yes, they are. And one thing I do want to point out, I looked this up before I came here, just so I because I don't know that much about prairie dogs at times. We know it's against the law to have like a pet raccoon or a pet fox or pet deer, all that. They took this out in 2008. So this is not against the law to have pet prairie dogs. They're not breaking the law or anything like that. I just wanted to point that out. They're legal. And I want to point this out too. Hal and Amy were the 2023 landowner land stewards of the year award for Texas Parks and Wildlife and for the Texas Hill Country. And I attribute a lot of it to their work with prairie dogs. They've done a host of other things, but I mean, anybody can grow a deer. I mean, you cannot, everybody can do this.
What we hear a lot about is, what do you do about all those holes? If you've got livestock and you got those holes, that's the biggest complaint that we.
And that's what people always say is that my talking about the holes in your livestock, the cows step in the holes and break their legs, and or you're riding your horse through there and the horse steps in the hole and breaks his leg. How many of y'all have ever been in a prairie dog town? Okay. If you can't see that hole, you need to get a horse that's not blind, and like Linda says, if you've got a bunch of 3-legged cows, it's going to be a problem. But if a cow steps in that hole, he's got 3 legs to keep him up, and she's going to be just fine. Yes, ma'am. She's asking about the field. I can't speak for them, but I will say this. You know, Mason Mountain is talking about a field trip. Mason Mountain is not open to the public for public just to drive through, but I host as many field trips and visitations as I can. Like if y'all wanted to come to Mason Mountain, you know, that's what we do. We will work out a time with you. You can come over there. Yes. Absolutely. Oh, look at there. And this is something I think I may have alluded to earlier, and I'm gonna go ahead and throw it out there. I'm not making any promises for next week, but I'm gonna throw it out there. Mason Mountain is not open to the public for like day use because we're not a park. We don't intend to be a park. Parks, you know, in this country especially, they tend to be overpopulated with people. They get a lot of people. You know, Mason Mountain was given to us by a private landowner in 1997. He wanted it to be a research and demonstration area, and we have 4 people that work there. So we can't be open to like a park would be. But we have just purchased that lady's property, and it's not very big. It's only 200 acres. But and it was hard to sell on Austin, but I sold it as this is going to be like a showroom for wildlife management, to where on that 200 acres, you're going to have water guzzlers, you're going to have bird houses, you're going to have butterfly gardens, you're going to have all the things that you may do on your property if you were, say, a Prop 11 person, the wildlife exemption. And so, you know, I sold it picturing like it's going to be like a taxidermy studio, to where you walk into that room and it's really nice and you see all the stuff he does. It's all junked up. I mean, it's just thick. It's a lot of it, but it's all there, and it's going to be open 7 days a week right now. And what I'm going to be looking for when we get to that point is people like you who are willing to do projects out there to help us get that on the ground. And the good thing is, unlike Mason Mountain right now, that if you do something and you want to come out there next Saturday, we're not open. You know, this place would be open. You could get up and leave Kerrville, and you could drive over there, and you could work in the butterfly garden or do something, or just drive through, you know, 4 or 5 miles that of roads we'll have, and look at wildflowers, or look at wildfires, because prescribed burning is going to be a big part of what we do, so people can drive and see what a prescribed fire looks like any day they want to on their own time. So we're going to be looking for master naturalist projects to help us get through with that. I get both. Yes, sir. The question was, does the grass grow better around the prairie dog towns? And I'll let Hal answer this, and then I'll have something to add also.
Probably even more important than that, the perennial forbs grow better, because they will actually eat the grass. The perennial forbs, which are much higher raw protein content than the native grass. I mean, we love the native grass, but the perennial forbs are even harder to grow. And we do census counts, so we know pretty well where the deer are. And we did not see deer where the prairie dogs were until we put the prairie dog towns in. Now we almost always see deer there. We see turkeys there. Amy, what all have we seen? Badgers. Yeah, the crows, ravens come in. Linda says they eat the scat because it's a probiotic. I thought it was crazy when she said that, but I think it's right, because you see the birds in there eating on the ground, And they're not eating grass.
Our two towns that we had, and they were very active for a couple of 3 or 4 years. We had a spotlight line that would go through that valley, actually go right through those towns. And from 1999 until we put the towns there, you were lucky to see 3 or 4 deer in that valley, in that area. After that town was established, that first time we ran it, we saw 23 deer. And then every time we ran that spotlight line, we would see more than 10 deer down in that valley. So it was like a self-made food plot for those animals. One other thing I want to point out is we had an intern for us that left us, went to get his master's degree at Sul Ross University, and his research was on prairie dog towns and livestock usage, cattle out around Marfa. And this was a really huge place. I don't remember how big it is, but the prairie dog town was like 2,000 acres itself. And then the rest of the ranch was maybe 70, 100,000 acres. It was very big. When the range were average range, those cows lived in that prairie dog town. When it got really, really dry, they would move out of the prairie dog town. And then when the rains came, they would come back in. So they preferred that grass that was growing in the prairie dog town. Yes, ma'am. We as Texas Parks and Wildlife. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, it's not me. I'm a state employee. I don't buy land. No. It's going to be it's going to be part of the wildlife management area. She was asking, did we resell it? No, it's going to be part of the wildlife management area that I want to make like an education center for things. But when I say an education center, really rough to where we're not going to have like nice buildings and houses and things like that. It's going to be more of a wild land that people can go to. Yes, sir. Well, that's not the that's well, javelina are to you like prairie dogs are to people in Amarillo. Javelina is big game animal, and actually it's not very sought after in Texas. But we're working to get it listed as a Boone and Crockett species to try to bring more attention to it. There's a couple of things really hurting javelina right now. Part of that is feral hogs. Feral hogs could, somewhat compete, but really what they do is move javelina out of the best habitat and push them in the lesser quality habitat. High fences are very, very hard on javelina, not the fences themselves, but when pigs dig, if somebody builds a high fence, they're wanting to keep something in or something out. That's the only reason for doing it. So when they get a hole in the fence, what goes through that hole? Javelina, the first thing that goes through it. So they put a snare there to try to catch coyotes because they typically don't want coyotes. They catch a lot of javelina. Javelina love corn. And there again, if you got a corn feeder, they come to the corn feeder, and these people are paying a lot to hunt deer, and they shoot all the javelina. Javelina are not just like, but very similar to prairie dogs in that they have a very low reproduction rate. They have 2 babies a year and are lucky to raise 1. Nothing like feral hogs. And then a lot of people think of them as a feral hog. So the overall, I think, and we don't do a lot of surveys, but overall, I think the population is declining in the state of Texas, and you're not seeing the numbers that you did at all. And there again, it's sad because it's a really neat little animal that's endemic and native to Texas, and it is a game animal. There likely could be. When I moved up here in '99, there were still some native populations of javelina. You know where the Blue Mountains are in southern Mason? The Blue Mountains over into Kimball County, and I'm sure they were in Menard, and they could still be some in western Menard, but I just don't work over there very much.